Okay. Hi, everyone. Uh, can everyone hear me? So, great. People coming in. I'll give it a couple more minutes. Uh, Hopefully you guys can see the double screen pseudo demo that I've set up. I'll kind of get into that shortly. Oh, Bill, you made it. I know it's like really early in Singapore right now. Amazing, amazing. Okay, it's like 3:01. I'll give it like one more minute and then I will get going. Cool. So we have about 25 people so far. Kind of excited to do this. Hope everyone is doing well, staying safe. It's a pretty crazy time at the moment. All right, so there's about 30 of us here now, so I'll kind of get started, and if anyone has any questions, if you're joining late, please let me know. So to start off, my name is Barry Chung. I am a cinematographer, freelance cinematographer here in Toronto, Canada, and I predominantly work in short format production, so that includes commercials. I do a lot of sort of branded content, a little bit of corporate work. So a lot of what I'm doing is interviews, and in the last couple of years, I've also started doing a lot of tabletop work. So as I talk about reflected light and the CRLs system and my experience with it, that's kind of the context of what I've been using the system in. Let's scroll back here, make sure that no one had any questions. Cool. So I kind of have a rough itinerary of kind of what I wanted to cover, but obviously if you guys have any questions, feel free to chime in. Hopefully I catch them. If I miss it, please feel free to repeat yourself, and hopefully I can catch it and answer your question as best as I can. So just, yeah, again, just talking about what I do. I mainly work in commercials and short format stuff. So tabletop and interviews are the two main ways that I've been deploying CRLs. I've been using the system for about 2 years now, just shy of 2 years, and it really has become part of my everyday use kit. So pretty much every job I'm on, I'm finding some use for it. So as you can see, I have sort of two frames set up. So this sort of selfie camera where I'm talking to you guys, and down below you should be seeing kind of a tabletop kind of setup. I wanted to preface that this by no means is the best way to demo any kind of lighting tutorial. And so I kind of weighed the pros and cons, but I know there's so many of you out there, or I had the impression anyway, that have never seen the CRLs system in use live. And so despite the shortcomings of this format, predominantly that it's streamed, so the quality's not great. And on top of that, I'm using a phone, so I'm sort of subject to the automated response of the phone. So it's going to auto white balance, it's going to auto exposure, which is the big one. So being able to sort of see before and after is a little tricky. I have sort of flashed the phone with a panel light, which is outside of the frame of what you guys are seeing, but should be in the view of what the camera's seeing, to hopefully trick the camera not to auto expose too much. My early test today sort of proved semi-successful, so we'll see how that goes. But again, you know, I kind of weighed the pros and cons, and I know a lot of you just want to sort of see something happening as I manipulate the reflectors. So hopefully that proves useful. If it doesn't, let me know, and maybe I can reposition that camera, that phone, to something else. So I wanted to first spend the first couple of part of this first part of this live stream talking about the system. So If you're not familiar, just to kind of go over some of the physical parts of the system. So CRLs, this is 4 reflectors. This is the smallest size that I have here. Come in basically 4 different densities of diffusion, as they phrase it. So the nomenclature is 1 through 4. So the number 1 is almost a mirror-like surface. So this is kind of your number 1. Again, this is the smallest size. This is 7 centimeter by 7 centimeter. It also comes in 15 by 15, 25 by 25, 50 by 50, and meter by meter. Everything's metric. The first size, number 1, is kind of a hard reflector. It's almost like a mirror. I actually have some mirrors here just to compare. So this is your standard kind of mirror, which I have sort of rigged up here. I still actually use actual mirrors for some of my works, especially my tabletop work. And then this is kind of a number 1 CRLs reflector. So just a little bit sort of softer than a standard mirror. And then on the back of the reflector is this dovetail. And so it comes with, there are these mounts that slide into the reflector. So you have this sort of dovetail here, you have this mount, this is what they call a C-wheel. You spin this, opens up, very much kind of like a hot shoe adapter on a camera. And this kind of slides into the dovetail here. You slide it in, and you kind of lock it off. And now it's sort of locked off. You know, can't come off. And then it terminates, well, these ones anyway, terminate in a baby pin receiver, or I think 5/8 if you're in Europe, or 750 if you're in Canada. So that's kind of the general mounting of how the system works. So again, a number 1, and then from there you go to a number 2, which is a little softer. So this is a number 2. Let's see if I can get the skip angle just right. So you can see a little bit more brushed in terms of softness. And then from there you go to number 3, which I haven't even opened for the 7x7s. I typically use the 1s and 2s a lot. So it's actually a little bit of an unboxing as well. So here's the number 3. So even sort of softer. And then the softest is the number 4, which is almost starting to become like a styro, or kind of like a foam core. So that's your number 4. So just to go through it again, number 4, which is your softest, number 3, which is a little bit harder. Let's see if I can, there's not really light to catch here. Number 2, which is a little harder, and your number 1, which is almost a mirror. So how Lightbridge has described it is they basically wanted to design the system to fit between your traditional methods of a mirror reflector and your soft muslin or your ultra bounce. And I have found that to be true in terms of the quality. Hey Brian, so Brian asks, why don't I use the 3s and 4s so much? I'll get into that certainly in some more detail, but basically I'm using the system in an overarching way. I'm using the system primarily to motivate sunlight, more so than anything else. Certainly for tabletop work, I'm using it to motivate sunlight, and I'm also using it predominantly to light backgrounds when I'm shooting interviews, so environments. So the 1s and 2s I find are more in line with aesthetically what I'm trying to achieve, where the 3s and 4s, aren't generally hard enough for that kind of work. That being said, I did sort of have the opportunity to work with a friend of mine on a pitch project, kind of proof of concept film that he was shooting as the DP, and I kind of went out and sort of helped him and kind of worked as a little bit as his gaffer. And certainly not by design, but ended up using CRLs more as the 2-day shoot went ahead. I started thinking, oh, this might be kind of a great application for this based on what he was asking. And ended up sort of using the threes quite a bit as highlights in a narrative sort of situation. So that was pretty great. But otherwise, ones and twos is mainly what I'm using. Have I found myself using them to light faces, and if so, how did I approach them? I haven't actually really used them directly to light faces. I'm still, for interviews and stuff, I'm still using traditional methods. You can sort of see some of that stuff, some behind the scenes breakdowns that I've done on my Instagram page. So typically in an interview setting, I'm still using like an Octabank, Chimera Octabank 5 foot, 7 foot, or going through like a frame or something. For softness, I have done stuff where I've put a reflector, you know, in the same axis of the soft light for a little more punch, or I'm using them a lot for cross light. So I'll still key with a traditional soft source, and then using reflectors to add some cross light to feel like it's coming from a window. So that kind of application. Have I found myself, are they easy to scratch or damage, Alex asks. You do have to handle them with a bit of care. It is kind of a polished aluminum that does scratch. I can show you some, these ones are actually in pretty good shape. I have some other sizes that have been scratched a little bit. Generally, you want to be careful how you handle them. That being said, I haven't noticed the quality of the light changing drastically because of the scratch. Once you sort of see once the light is sort of coming off the reflector at that angle of incidence, you don't really perceive the scratch. I'm sure if it was, you know, a deep scratch, or you were really to mar up the entire surface over the long lifetime of the reflector, you might start to see a change in quality, especially with the number 1, which is very polished. You know, once you get to like a 3, I don't really think you're going to see any change in quality from a couple of scratches. That being said, you do kind of want to handle them with some care. You don't want to be too abusive with them. Oli asks, do you know how mirrors change the light? There's more directionality, right? Hence less from flags. Yes, so certainly a mirror is very punchy and is going to throw that light in a very specific way. But even with these reflectors, because of the surfaces, there is still a tremendous amount of control over where that light goes. Obviously, a number 1 is more directional than a 2, and a 2 is more than a 3. But even the case of a 3, going back to the example that I helped my friend with on his film a couple weeks ago, we used them for eye lights, and he was really impressed by being able to take a number 3 and get it just into the eyes, where something like a styro or something would kind of light up the whole face. And it was a pretty low-key thing we were doing. So having that kind of control was great. So yes, there is kind of a less need to have flags to control it because of the way the light is contained in the reflector, and you really don't get much spill light off of it once you get off axis. If you go to, there's a breakdown, the last breakdown that I did on my Instagram page, there's a photo that I took of the reflectors off angle, and you can see that there's like no spill light coming off of that, where again, if it were styro or something, or a traditional bounce, you would get that spill. Just going through the questions here. Hello everybody who's joining. What sizes for the eye light? I was using 15s and 25 eyes for eye light. What light sources do you use? Another question. Okay, well, we're gonna get into all of that. So just to quickly repeat those who have joined us, because the count has kind of doubled to about 60 people now. So again, Thank you for joining wherever you are in the world. I hope everyone is staying safe out there. My name is Barry Chong. I am a cinematographer here in Toronto, and today we are talking about these reflectors by a company called the Lightbridge. And this is a system called CRLs, which stands for the Cine Reflect Lighting System. As you can see, there's sort of two screens going on here. One where I'm talking to you guys, and one I have a little demo going on that I'd like to sort of get to later on in the session. So we've just quickly talked about the physical part of the system. So 4 reflectors, 4 different qualities. We've talked about the mounting system, which is this C-wheel mount that fits into the dovetail on the back of the reflector, slides in and locks off. I sort of started getting into the system by purchasing the starter kit. So Lightbridge themselves are going to go live tomorrow, I believe at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I think they might be actually here on the chat, so they can chime in with those details. But they're going to be talking about the starter set. So for those who aren't familiar, the starter kit is a kit they put together for you to just kind of get into the system. I had sort of been using traditional mirrors for my tabletop work, so this kind of stuff where just kind of taking these like dollar store mirrors and rigging them to base plates and to try to get these kind of sunny splash effects for my tabletop work. And I got turned on to this system and wanted to give it a try, and sort of looked into it more and realized that they offered a starter kit. So the starter kit that they offer is 4 sizes of the 15 by size. So this is your 15 by 15 size. You get 4 of these. You also get 2 of, in all the densities, 1 through 4. You also get 2 of the 25 by sizes in number 3, number 4, as well as 2 of these C-wheel mounts. So if you're doing, doing some smaller stuff, or you just kind of want to give it a try and, just play around with it a little bit, it's kind of a very cost-effective way to get into it. And from there, I sort of spent about half a year mainly using the starter kit, mainly using it with tabletop, and it was a great way to get a feel for the system, kind of get a sense of how to position the lamp, the source, and then position and rig kind of the reflectors. So yeah. The only downside I would say is that you only get 2 mounts, but it is a great way to start using the system, and eventually from there you can sort of upgrade stuff. Just going through some of the comments here. So someone asked about light sources. We'll definitely get into that in a moment. How much Canadian for the starter kit? I don't know in Canadian. There's no real local reseller here in Canada. I bought mine from BB&S in the States, and I believe it's $5.95 US for the starter kit. So it depends on when you import it into Canada what the exchange rate is, which is not great right now. But yeah, I believe it was $5.95 US. And then from there, I sort of upgraded about 8 months into it. I realized that I loved using it, and this was the way that I wanted to move forward, and I sort of got the upgrade kit. So the upgrade kit allows you to get these bags. So if you joined in, I guess, on Lightbridge's stream last week, they did their own live stream last week. There was a bunch of discussion about bags. From an end user standpoint, I decided to go with the Cordura bags. I like sort of these better. They also come, there's another option like a Tyvek bag, which I haven't used. I like these a lot. It works very much like a scrim bag. I think it's really important. I find it very useful to treat them like scrim bags and live them with the stand that has the reflector mounted to it. A lot of people sometimes, or have kind of assistants, leave the bags back, you know, where holding is, or leave them with the rest of the case that they live in. But I think the beauty of the system and the speed of the system is having everything with you like a scrim bag on the stand, much like you would scrims with a lamp, and be able to swap it out very quickly. How would I compare the #1 CRLS with the DIY mirrors? The mirrors are, the #1 CRLS is still softer than a mirror. I can sort of demo that just now. So it is a bit of different quality. The mirror is a very hard quality, which when I'm doing tabletop work, I will admit that sometimes I really want that super hard quality. So I am still using, you know, just plain old mirrors. But what's nice about the CRLS stuff is because it's just a little bit softer, it starts to blend out nicely, especially when you're starting to put like a smaller reflector into a larger reflector. You really, you know, the light tends to really blends out nicely, and so you don't sort of get that double shadow going on. So that's, yeah, that's, you know, the main difference. But I'm using a little bit of everything, certainly for tabletop. For backgrounds and interviews and stuff like that, I'm really just using this. The mirrors are really too small, and the scale of what I'm photographing is too large generally. Okay, so that's a little bit about the starter kit. I also wanted to talk about rigging. So there's a lot of ways to rig this stuff. So really, once you get to the end of, once you get to the mount, which ends in a baby receiver. They also make one that is a male baby pin, so that can go right into a grip head. But I'm typically rigging this stuff onto C-stands. So along with the cases, I have kind of all my accessories in something like this. So this is a little kit bag thing made by Tenba. They make a bunch of camera bags and accessories, so I have sort of all my accessories kind of in here. So there is, again, the C wheel. There's also these, which are made by Matthews. These are I believe they call it a 6-inch collar. And so it's like a baby, extended long baby pin, but it's got a piece on the end here that will fit into a grip head. And what's great about these is this can't, once this is in a grip head, this can't slip out. As long as you don't open the grip head all the way, this can't come out. So unlike a Mayfair pin or something like that, if you don't grip it quite right, or the grip head loosens a little bit, it can slip right through. So I like these for that reason. And I also like rigging them into just a traditional C-stand. What I like about the C-stand rigging is that it's very linear. So, you know, there's, you're panning the grip head, you're tilting it, you're rotating a stand. You know, a lot of people will go and use sort of something like this, which is like kind of like a magic arm. What I don't like about this, I will sort of use these sometimes if I have to get a smaller reflector right into the same angle as a large reflector. So I'll clamp this to the same stand that is holding the riser on the same stand that is holding the larger reflector, and then mount my smaller reflector on there. But what I don't like about this and arms is that if you loosen the arm, it loosens completely. And so you have to try to find that position again. It's sometimes tricky, where with a C-stand, I can sort of set it, and then depending on what I'm getting at that point, I can trim the C-stand. So if it's like, if the pan's right, or the tilt's right, and the angle's right on the stand, I can just loosen the grip head and just like trim it in and out of the beam. And so I kind of like that method. But otherwise, something like this, like a magic arm or a Noga arm or something, works as well. So that's kind of rigging. I don't know if anyone has any other questions. I'm sorry if I'm ignoring anybody here. I just want to leave enough time to kind of go through the demo. So fixtures. So that's always kind of a conversation, like topic that comes up in conversation is what lights to use. So at the end of the day, these are reflectors. So there's nothing, you know, magical about them. You know, they will reflect any kind of light you put into it. That being said, I think your experience using them will change depending on what kind of light source you use. So when I first got started with the system, all I had were some traditional Fresnels, and I also had some Aperture 120Ds with their Fresnel. And so for a while I was kind of using that stuff. I'll see if I can, I've got some photos I can try to bring up here. Fuzzy asked, do I have any Cine in the 6 YouTube content coming out? At the moment, no, but maybe that might change in the future. But thanks for remembering that I did that. So I don't know if you guys can see here. So that is, that's kind of in the early days when we were using just Fresnels. So the lamp is sort of rigged down there below, going into a reflector up above. But as you can see, there is a flag on the top there, a little hat, because unlike you know, something like a Lico, which is what I'm using now, and more recently dado lights with parallel beam adapters, there is a certain amount of spill light that comes off that is difficult, more difficult to control. And so if you're working in an environment where you don't want that spill light, sometimes you actually do. It actually sometimes is useful to add some fill in the scene. You have to sort of take care of that. So, and you're losing all that light that's not hitting the reflector and, you know, hitting surrounding that reflector, you're losing. So in terms of efficiency, it's not as efficient. But that being said, you know, if you're looking to get into the system and you don't have, you know, dados with PB adapters, or you don't have even a Lico, don't worry. You know, you can use kind of what you have existing. So, but that being said, these days I'm using Aperture 120D Mark IIs and 300D Mark IIs with their new spotlight attachment, primarily using the 26-degree barrel that they make for that. The reason for that is that because of the slightly wider beam spread on that, I can fit more reflectors into that same source. Unlike the dado stuff, which is very punchy for the size of lamp it is, but because it is so focused, it's a little bit trickier to fit multiple reflectors into the same source, which is sometimes what you want to do. So I find the 26-degree aperture works quite well. But the data works really great too. If I need to do, I'll sort of use the aperture to kind of get my bigger swaths of stuff, and then certainly for interviews, for like backgrounds, and then for like mid-ground stuff, it gets a little bit messy to try to kick a reflector into the mid-ground as well. So now I've been just taking that dado and positioning that in the mid-ground to kind of light in the mid-ground, or to sort of add some textural things to people. So there's a question here, diff 1 to 4 with the same strong narrow beam light, how do the quality and fall off differ? Right, so asking about the differences for 1 to 4. So maybe what I can do is, there's about half an hour left, so maybe what I can do is I can go to the demo here. So if you just tuned in, you know, a little while ago, I have a second phone photographing kind of a little tabletop setup. I want to preface that this is not the best platform to be showcasing really lighting, but I know so many of you, again, have not seen the system and have not seen the system being used live, and I felt that even with the shortcomings of using a phone, which is going to auto exposure and auto white balance and sort of do all this stuff, that hopefully it proves to be useful to some degree. And if nothing else, I would love to use maybe this platform to field any questions that maybe I can go ahead and shoot a little bit of a video offline, which can be seen in a better quality. So please let me know. So with that, let me sort of switch over. So we'll switch this over to here. So this is kind of the setup I have going on here. I had to do my best to black out the space that I'm working in. My place is kind of surrounded by windows, so it's a little difficult to do this in daytime, but I've got some blacks up and around. Okay, so hopefully you guys can also still hear me. Let me know, because I'm gonna walk over to the reflectors here and start showing you guys a little bit of the different qualities of diffusion. But if you can't hear me, let me know. I'll try to walk back to this phone and check in a moment. So just to preface a little bit of what you're seeing right now. So this is an overhead, again, down below that you're seeing of this tabletop setup. This is on an iPhone 7 Plus, for those wondering. I have a little LED panel shining into the lens of that camera, so you might see a little haze. And the reason I did that is that the iPhone is going to want to auto expose depending on the intensity of light. So I've sort of taken this panel and have shined it into the lens of the camera. It's actually visible on the camera in general, but with this dual stream, you're only seeing the top half of the field of view of the camera. So the bottom half should be seeing that light still, and hopefully that is mitigating some of that auto exposure. I tested it earlier and it was semi-successful. So we'll see how this goes. What you're seeing right now, right here, is a 15 by 15 number 2 reflector, and that is with a aperture 120D2 with the spotlight and 26-degree spotlight mount on there. I also have the Dado DLED3 Turbo with PB intensifier, so we can also take a look at that if anyone is interested in that. So we'll just put this back here. Sorry for the shakiness here. Okay, so I'm going to leave the comments here for a second, guys. So if I miss your question, apologies in advance. Okay, so hopefully you guys can still hear me. So again, what you're seeing here is a number 2 15 by 15 reflector. So we're going to pan this off for a moment. So that's kind of off, and then we will slowly kind of come back on here. And this is what I was talking about earlier in terms of rigging it to a C-stand. What I like about this is once I've got the angle right, I can sort of just trim it by just dealing with a single axis of the C-stand. You know, in the case of a magic arm, you know, you loosen the magic arm and it's fully loose. And if you put a good hand on it, but you know, to try to manipulate it exactly where you want it can be a little bit frustrating because you're dealing with a thing that is floating in you know, 3D space essentially, where with a C-stand you can just deal with one axis at a time, whether it be tilt on the head or pan on the head. So that's a number 2. So again, off and then slowly coming on. In general, when I'm setting the reflectors, I want to sort of see where the light is. So what I'll often do is I'm often sort of setting the lamp. It's important to kind of understand the principle of angle of incidence here. You know, thinking like knowing how light sort of skips and that sort of 90-degree rule of how angle of incidence works to maximize the output you're getting out of the reflector. With something like a LECO that is a wider kind of beam, a little bit less of a critical thing to think about. But when you start getting into the data, which is very, very spotty, sort of knowing how angle of incidence works will allow you to get the most out of the light. If you can, always try to, I would say, put the lamp in line with the reflector. So you've probably seen it on, or if you guys saw the example I just showed earlier with that Fresnel mounted to the stand, or if you go to, I guess, Lightbridge's own Instagram page and some of the examples they post, oftentimes you'll see the lamp mounted to the bottom of the stand and the reflector on that same stand. So what's great about that is if you're moving around a lot, so on tabletop I'm not moving around a lot, but if you know, narrative stuff you are, and you're relighting and stuff like that, what's nice about that is you're able to pick up the light and pick up the reflector at the same time. You're not like moving the reflector and then having to like move the lamp again and try to find you know, the angle again. So that's kind of an efficient way to work. Just checking if anyone has any questions. Everybody can hear me fine. Great, awesome. So that's just kind of one tip there. But yeah, so oftentimes, you know, sometimes you can't necessarily put the light in line with the reflector, sometimes just based on the frame or based on the location and the space you're working in. You have to put the lamp off axis to the reflector. So just understanding angle of incidence is really important. What I'm also doing is once I have my light more or less in the position that I think it needs to be, I'm often playing like shadow puppets. So I'll often sort of, you know, take my hand, and again, a little bit less critical with something like this LECO with a 26-degree lens, because it's got such an even beam of light and it's got a pretty broad beam of light. So I don't have to be perfectly in aim, because whether I'm here or whether I'm here, I'm getting more or less the same intensity of light. But with something spottier like the Dado, or even with a LECO, I'll often sort of you know, play shadow puppets. So I'll take my hand and I'll kind of do this, and I'll sort of see kind of, you know, where am I in the beam and where am I out. So here I'm obviously out, here I'm in. So I'm often looking. It's really important, I think, to always look back and see where your beam of light is, you know, and see, you know, what kind of spread you've got and where you are in the beam. Because essentially, that's what you're doing. You know, I've kind of heard the analogy that these reflectors are kind of, or the light that you're using as kind of a river, like a stream. And you know, what you're doing with the reflectors, you're essentially just trying to catch a bit of that stream and redirecting it. And so that's kind of what this is. You've got this beam of light, and again, talking about light fixtures, something like a LECO or something like the Dado with the PB adapter, that is going to give you a long amount of throw and a fairly even beam across the field is going to give you a better kind of experience, as opposed to, say, a Fresnel, which is going to fall off greater and kind of have a hot spot and some feathering to the beam. So you have to be more critical about the aim there. And also, you know, you can't sort of work at the same kind of distances that you could with a LECO. Sorry, that was a bit of a tangent, but we will go to, we'll sort of change this out. So again, what I really like to do is take the bag and live it on the stand. So it's kind of immediately here, so that if you don't have the right quality to begin with, you can easily just quickly swap it out. So again, in this case, I normally just leave the C wheel attached. I'll loosen the C wheel, dismount it, put this back in the bag. And then go to so this is like this is a number 1. So that's already quite hard. Maybe what I'll do is I'll do a little A and B here. So again, number 2. So that's a number 1. And again, once it's set, I can sort of trim it. So if I want it like aimed right on those walnuts, or if I want it to kind of fall off a little bit, it's so easy just to take the grip head, loosen it, and re-aim it without having to loosen an arm, and then the whole thing, you know, goes whack. So that's a number. Actually, let's aim it fully here. So that's a number 1, and here we are coming on to a number 2. So I can't tell. Again, this phone that I'm doing this demo on might be auto-exposing, so you might not see a huge change. I mean, you can see the shadow quality if you look kind of right here. Like this is a number 1, which is quite sharp, and if you go to a number 2, it does start to get a little bit softer. So number 1, number 2, and then number 1 again, and then going entirely off. So you can see also just the tremendous amount of control that you have with this reflector. You know, I mean, this is granted number 1, but it's, you know, quite direct, and even the way that, you know, like a number 2 kind of feathers out is really kind of nice. And really, once you get to, you know, a certain point, like, you know, there's kind of no spill light outside of that, or very little. So that's a number 2. Let's see if anyone has any questions. Does a larger reflector create a softer light? Greg asks. Yes, a larger reflector will create a softer light because, again, you know, we're still within the realm of physics here. You know, physics are going to be physics. So the principle of wrap still very much applies. So just like, you know, anything in lighting, the larger the source, the more wrap it's going to be, the softer it's going to be. And so yes, so if you are kind of, I guess, shooting talent, or you know, you want something a little more pleasing, you know, those principles of larger source is going to be softer is still valid. Are your light fixtures typically at full power? No, actually, it depends. You know, amount of light, you know, the intensity of the light as a starting point is heavily dictated on other things. So, you know, camera choice is going to make, you know, what camera you're shooting on, what ISO you're shooting on that camera, what base stop you're working at, is it a low key thing, a high key thing? So it really depends on, you know, what the condition is that you're working in. So it depends. Sometimes, yeah, the light is at 100%. In this particular instance, it's at 100%. Maybe that's what you meant, Billy. So for demo purposes, I have it at 100% here, just because I'm trying for this iPhone to not open up too much, and in terms of its auto exposure. So I'm playing at 100% here, and this is a 120D Mark II. But again, it really depends. Barry, so Lightbridge. Oh, thanks guys. Thanks for joining. Do you use tape to cover off parts of Diff 1 when doing tabletop work? I don't. So the question was, do I sort of take some tape and you know, create a bit of a gobo effect or break up the number 1 with tabletop? I don't. What I prefer to do if I'm looking for more of a dappled thing is to leave the reflector as is and then put a cookie in front of it. So I've got like an 18x24 wood cookie and an 18x24 wire cookie from Matthews that I will put in front of that to break up the light. I've done stuff though where I've, like, you know, needed the number 1 to be just a little softer, and I think it was something where, you know, time was pressing, and so I have taken my palm and I've just kind of done this on the reflector, just to make it a little bit softer in a pinch. So I've done stuff like that, but not with the tape. What effect do different texture panels have? So again, I think we're talking about the quality of light. So I'll continue with that. So again, this is a number 1, which if you missed the beginning part of this is the system's hardest diffusion. So this is almost like a mirror. And actually, what I can do is, let me get an actual mirror. So this is, so again, this is a number 1. And we'll see if we can, we'll try to leave that aimed here. And then this is, so this is an actual mirror. So actual mirror, let's see, diffusion 1, actual mirror. Now to be fair, bringing back Greg's point about size of source, this mirror here that I'm demoing is much smaller than this 15 by number 1. So obviously that quality is going to be different as well. But it's pretty close, I would say. But, you know, I would say the mirror is just a scoosh harder. What I do like, you know, and when I'm using mirrors, the point of me using mirrors also is to use very small mirrors, because when I'm doing tabletop stuff, I want a very small splash of light in a very specific area. And so I'm using, you know, very small mirrors. So even this like mirror here, which is almost 7 by 7, I'll sometimes tape this even smaller, like tape it down, because I'm looking for a very tiny little splash of light and a very hard quality of light. So that's where I'm still kind of using mirrors. Show my fill light. I'm not quite sure what you mean by that, Dimitri. So I'm going through this. What effect? Okay, so again, sorry guys if I'm sort of missing some of your questions. I'm trying to go back and recap as much as I can. So moving forward, this is a number 3 reflector. So pan that back in. So again, that's now a number 3. So you can see again the phone is going to auto expose. So the quantity of light you're not going to really be able to get a sense of here. But if you look at the shadow quality here, hopefully you guys can see the shadow quality changing. So that's a number 3, number 1, number 3, a little less intensity, but a lot softer. And this is a case where, you know, talking about the reflectors, you know, a lot of people have asked me, well, why can't I just go to the dollar store and get a bunch of mirrors? And the truth is you can do that. What's really great about this system is that it's a system. You know, they've designed it so that it is, you know, you have these various levels of diffusion, these various sizes, you know, all the rigging has been sort of figured out for you, and so that it becomes a system. And you know, that's kind of my response to that is, yes, you can go and like find all these different surfaces and whatnot, and by all means that works. And again, I'll be first to admit that I'm still using real mirrors. But what's great about this system is that it's a system. So going to that point, I would look at this and I'd be like, well, maybe, I like the quality of that, but this is not enough light. So what I would do at that point is go up a size. So this is a 15 by number 3, and maybe I like the quality of that, but it's not enough light. So what I'll do is I'll go up a size. Granted, I have the beam spread, and again, this is why I like to use a Leica, because with a slightly wider lens, like a 26. I've got a 19 for this guy as well, but again, I like the 26 because I can fit more reflectors into that same beam. So here is a number 3, so same thing, but now much larger. So again, now all of a sudden I get way more light because I've got more reflector. I've got a larger reflector catching light here. So this is the 25 by, and now I get that same kind of quality, but that I had with the smaller one, but more quantity. So So that's the number, that's a 25 by number 3. So let me just round back to some of these questions here. Exactly. So if you could restart, what sizes and diffusers would you acquire for interviews and for tabletop? Okay, so Billy asks, what sizes and diffusions would I use for interviews and what I would use for tabletop? So for tabletop, I'm admittedly using 1s and 2s the most. I sometimes will go to a 3, but almost never. And then for interviews, again, I want to preface that I'm using this mainly for backgrounds, for hair lights, for cross lights, like motivating a window. So 1s and 2s certainly for that, because I'm normally after a very sunny kind of look. And I'm almost never using 4s. I find the 4s quite soft and something that I'm not really reaching for that often. But more recently, I have found the 3s to be really great if you just need a bit of eye light, and you still need that control of aim that the reflector gives you, that like a styro wouldn't. But you need it to be, subtle and soft and kind of blend out in that eye region. So 3s have been really great for that. I'm guessing the fill is ambient window light. Yeah, so in this particular example, if I pan this off, there's still a bit of ambient light in here. The space this is my place, and the space that I live in, I'm surrounded by windows that I have sort of very little control over. So I've done my best to kind of black out the world that I'm kind of in, but it is quite challenging. I normally actually do all my lighting tests at night. And also the phone is auto-exposing up. So, whatever this base light that you're seeing here is just kind of from the phone auto-exposing and from the amount of ambience that is in here. And if we get really nerdy, I can let you know how much is in here. So that's like, I'm working at 2 2/3 at 24/800, 180. So we bring the reflector back on here just to think about contrast. Again, this is a number 1. This is, 11 1/3 in the beam. How would you use these to light someone's face in a narrative situation mixing with natural window light? So I would use these, yeah, if you're using window light, so say, I don't know what the situation might be, but if you have like a character cross-lit with a window, I would use these reflectors to either wrap around that window light further. So if they're very sort of sidey, you could use the reflector to wrap that window light around. You could use them to catch a bit of eye light. Like you say, you want to really keep it quite moody still. Like if it's, if you've got a big contrast range between window side and room side that is otherwise dark, the reflectors are really great for a bit of eye light. Or if you get like a larger one, like a 50 by, say, number 3, you could probably use that to wrap that window light further. Hey, Mike. So Mike Hoffman asks, what is the process when beam splitting, and what's a real-world example of how you use multiple panels on a human subject? So I think what you're talking about is double bounce, if I'm not mistaken. So I haven't done a lot of stuff with double bounce. I did do something recently, which is actually it was up on my Instagram story for a while, but I think the Lightbridge actually reposted it. It's a shot of a DL83 going into a reflector, going into another reflector, backlighting this like little set piece, and we were panning it on a C-stand. So that was a case of a double bounce. I haven't done a lot of double bounce stuff. What's great about the system is that, because you get so much punch, you can use it to redirect stuff. I haven't found a need to do that. It can get a little bit messy if you're trying to double bounce stuff. Depending, like it's sometimes better just to take another lamp and a reflector and put it where you need to put it, as opposed to trying to get fancy for the sake of getting fancy, I guess. I did do a test one day where I had some sunlight coming through the windows here, and I actually sent that sunlight 20 feet one way, 10 feet another way, around a corner, and kind of lit my bathroom, which is kind of like right around the corner from where the sun was coming in the window. So it is possible, which is quite remarkable, to kind of catch light somewhere and send it, around corners if you had to. But I haven't found the need to get fancy for the sake of getting fancy. Same beam, let's make a secondary backlight. So Tom says, yeah, using the same beam to make a secondary backlight. So yes, you could, take a beam and catch. I could take the light that's coming in here now. It's not on camera, obviously, but I could take the light that is coming from here and like redirecting it somewhere else. I would use something harder than a 3, but if I had like another number 1, let's see. It's a number 2. Let's see here. If we do. I don't know if this is going to work or not in terms of auto exposure. Probably not going to be able to see anything if we do that. So the angle might be weird. The angle might be weird. I need a bigger reflector too. Just trying to sort of showcase a double bounce here. But on top of that question, if you gel these, do you need to use half the strength you would normally because the light is passing through the gel twice? So Lee asks that. So on top of that question, if you gel these, do you need to use half the strength you would normally? Half the strength you would use because the light is passing through the gel twice. Yeah, I missed your first part of your question here. Right. So the question, yeah. So oh hey Adam. So talking about color, I'm always going to gel. I'm always going to gel the light. Let me flip this back actually. Okay, so let's flip this back around. I'll go down here. So the question was about gelling, changing color. So yes, I'm always going to be gelling the light. I'm not going to be gelling the reflector. I guess the